Well, good evening and welcome back to another episode of What's So Funny, the show that probes the minds, the brains, and the psyches of the people who make the funny. Tonight, stand-up comic Myq Kaplan is here to call me out on something I wrote about 2 years ago when he was a fresh-faced and impressionable contestant on NBC's Last Comic Standing. Does it get awkward? Well, tune in and find out. I spoke to Myq a week or so ago when he was in town performing at the Comedy Mix. We also discussed why MYQ is his desired spelling of his given name, why unfettered free speech is best, and Myq gets a lengthy plug-in for his own new podcast. But there's way more than just that. What you ask? Well, just listen. I'm here in the Myq Kaplan Suites in downtown Vancouver. You were just here to make the podcast rounds.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And then you managed to book a few shows.
Yeah, it was really fortunate. I was like, man, this is costing a little bit to fly in here. But they were like, well, since you're here to do some podcasts, why don't you just perform in our club that we didn't book anybody at, the Comedy Mix.
That's right. I saw you Thursday night. It was very funny.
I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. It's always, this is my first time here, so whenever I come to a new city, I'd heard good things about Vancouver, but don't know what the club is going to be like. And I came in, and it was full of people that seemed to be enjoying the show. And
number one prerequisite for you? To have it full of people.
Oh, I'll perform for an empty room for money. It's
right.
As long as that's what it's about for me. It's the money.
Clearly,
art comes second, right here. But certainly, people who want to be there. I'd rather be half full of people who want to be there than totally full of people who might not know why they're there. If they don't know there's going to be comedy or they don't know what kind of comedy it's going to be. There's a lot of possibilities.
Well, that's always a risk, though. Right?
Certainly.
Unless you're a name that transcends stand-up comedy, most people who go to a comedy club, they're just hoping that it's good.
Definitely. The longer you do it, the more hopefully, and the more podcasts you do, the more people will come out because they know who you are, and that's sort of the goal, to get to a point where if you're filling clubs with your people, or eventually theaters with your people, to get to a Brian Regan type of level, like that's a huge step, obviously, to not, you don't have to worry about where you're going. You just show up to a place and you know that your people will come out. But so this time I didn't know. I showed up to this place and people had come out and they all turned out to be pretty nice people, audience-wise.
Pretty nice. That's good. And I was thinking, watching you, that you have, and I think I've read this since, that you have a fast pace to it. And so there's tons of punchlines flying at us. And nobody gets a real chance to get unruly, but you must have performed to unruly people before.
Oh, I do have some experience with unruly types. Like, anybody could yell at me at any point, even if I am talking. That happens at times. It's not
usually
frequent.
Alcohol induced.
Oh, it happens. It definitely. Yeah, I prefer people. If people want to drink, that's totally fine. But weed will slow people down a little, so they might, maybe they won't follow everything, but at least they'll be relaxed, if you're going to be substanced up. But yeah, no, I've certainly had my share of audiences that get out of hand. I heard this thing about Mitch Hedberg's second album that he recorded, Mitch Altogether. He is much more fast-paced on it than he is on his first album. Is very sort of low, like loose, not lazy, but, just like very chilled. And on the second one, he is like, sort of snappy. And I heard that that's because people would yell out like requests for jokes if he paused too long. So he, by necessity, to avoid nice people, to be people who liked him, his fans.
Yeah, they like him too much. And there's the flip side of getting so well known. You go to a theater show and you get the yahoos. We love you.
Oh yeah.
Just as you're pausing for the punch.
I do I think that Brian Regan has figured it out, because I saw him a few times, like when he was performing at clubs in Boston, and one of the times, like, people were just yelling the whole time for him to do jokes, and he was just trying to, like, I just want to do the jokes that I want to do. And now I believe he'll just come out and do his hour, and then he'll do for an encore. he'll become a jukebox. He'll be,
Yeah.
what do you want to hear? And people will yell their favorites, and then he'll do them and if people don't want it, then they can leave. But everybody gets what they want.
That's right. He's got to keep on file in his brain every
Oh,
routine that he's done.
yeah, I mean, I guess I can't imagine like having to do that for me. Like people every once in a while remind you of an old joke that you do, and you're like, oh, I don't think that I could. Like, I think I actually was just watching like some old late night sets of like an old, not that I have tons of old late, but from the past few years, I was watching and in preparation of like making sure that I'm not doing the same jokes on new late night sets that I'm preparing for. And I was like, oh, that joke. I like totally forgot about it. If somebody was like, do the one about the sign in the car, I'd be like, well, I don't know. I don't know what that could be. That could be many things. But now I do. Now I'm on top of it.
Yeah, you have to be on top of it. I mean, you've done tons of talk shows, and yeah, they all want different material.
They do. I mean, I've definitely seen some like I've seen some people do if they went on like Ferguson and also Letterman. Like I've seen some similar like some crossover in those sets that people have done. So it's not necessarily a rule as far as unless you're on like the same show. I think you go on Letterman twice. Probably don't do the same.
Probably not.
Probably not. I mean, this is you've heard it from me. Probably don't do that. But yeah, that's if I ever get to a point where people are, for an encore demanding my old jokes, I'll be happy to oblige as much as possible. People sometimes do come up to me after shows and ask like, "Oh, I was sad you didn't do this thing from your CD." I'm like, "Oh, well, I guess you have the CD and you can continue to listen to it
over and over.
You are allowed."
So it's good that your business plan also includes late night talk shows and not just podcasts.
Definitely. I mean, podcasts are fun for sure, and potentially lower stakes, lower pressure. Not, I think the stake. I mean, potentially you are actually reaching more people with a podcast because who knows how many people will over the course of time listen to a podcast. So maybe I should be taking this more seriously. Listen up, everybody. Here now, I'm really buckling down.
50 years from now, they're gonna go back.
Yeah, and unearth. I mean, especially if. I mean, who knows? I mean, the future generations, I think they're going to be full of more podcast listeners. Of course, the amount of podcasts that there are going to be, the amount of content that's out there, like certain comedians like are on so many podcasts, but if you love that comedian, maybe you'll try to track down every appearance.
Well, that is certainly true. I mean, on the one hand, I kind of wish that there was a broader range of guests on a lot of the podcasts. But on the other hand, when I'm searching out a new podcast, I go, "Oh, who's somebody I like?"
Sure. I just started recording podcasts and releasing them of my own. I don't know if you.
Oh, you released them?
I do release.
I don't release this one yet.
I mean, for a little while, for about a month, I was recording them but not releasing them. I wanted to get a little backlog of a head start to make sure that I would be able to release them at a steady rate. But now I've got too many, so I was like, I got to release. Now I'm releasing them even faster than I thought. I planned to do one a week, and now I'm doing 2 a week.
What's the name of it?
The name of it is Hang Out With Me.
Hang Out With Me.
Hang Out With Me. And
the format?
It's I have 2 guests on at once. So myself.
So you need 3 mics.
In fact, I have a producer, Dave, who has a network. He's in Brooklyn, New York. Started his own new podcast network just in the past few months, called the Cool Super Cool Network, coolsupercool.com. So he's got, I think, 4 shows on there right now, and he has all the microphones. So I just go to his place. He has a podcast room, studio set up, and it's been a lot of friends, a lot of fellow comedians, a few people I hadn't met until doing the podcast.
That you just wanted to hang out with.
Yep, exactly. And that's the thing is you can't just ordinarily I had AJ Jacobs into my studio, and he is a best-selling author, sort of a Morgan Spurlock of writing. Like, well, he'll take on a project for a year. He did one where for a whole year he followed the rules of the Bible as literally as possible, and he wrote a book about it called The Year of Living Biblically, and it's really great. And then he did one where for, I think, 2 years, he was trying to get his body, every body part, in as much shape as possible. And he called it Drop Dead Healthy. And he just followed every, how do I best treat my ears and my stomach and my lungs and my skin and my, my hair, my feet, my endocrine system, whatever the case, every chapter dedicated to a different body part. And so he's a guy who I love reading his stuff. And I met him at another recording, a show that he had done that a friend of mine had put on, and I just emailed him. I got his contact, and I emailed him. And ordinarily, in real life, if you don't have a podcast, you can't just be like, "Hey, person that I don't really know, who's a famous, successful author, would you mind coming to a room where I am and just sitting and having a chat with me?"
I've got some questions.
Yeah, I'd love to just hang out if that's okay. And having a podcast is a way that it's now a societally accepted way of being like, hey, I'm gonna want to come hang out. Also, there'll be microphones. Oh,
Right.
great! So not just
That's
us.
a prerequisite.
Yeah.
There's a podcaster and comedian in town named Ian Boothby, and he tweeted the other day, and what he said, in the near future, we will only communicate by being on each other's podcasts.
I like it. I think that's for a while. I mean, I just started releasing this podcast the very end of September. Literally, I think at 11:59 on September 30th, and up until that point, like for months, people have been having podcasts, obviously, for in a greater and greater volumes for the past few years, and it got to the point where I'm like, well, I guess I should have one, or I would listen to my friends on their podcast. Like Nikki Glazer is a friend of mine.
She's been a guest here.
Excellent. She is a super funny comedian, and
Yes.
And her podcast, You Had to Be There with Sarah Schaefer, is one of my favorites. And so I would listen to it, and I would hear them week after week sharing their stories about their lives. Same thing with Pete Holmes on You Made It Weird. Like I would listen to their podcast, and I'd be like, oh, I'm keeping up with what they're doing. And I could not have seen them in 6 months, but I feel like I do know them. I don't just feel like I know them,
Yeah.
but I feel like I'm keeping track of their life, like as though we were having a conversation. Like they're telling the world the things that they would tell me on the phone anyway, like the opportunities, the relationships, the philosophical conundrums. Conundra. Is it conundrum or conundra? If they were thinking about that, they would talk about it. So I was like, but they're not getting it from me if I'm not talking to them. So I was thinking of initially calling my podcast because all of my friends have podcasts.
But
that, I guess I thought Hang Out With Me was shorter and simpler.
yeah,
And probably somebody else already has that other one.
you felt like to truly be considered part of the comedy community, you needed one of your own.
I think need is a strong word. Like, I think it would have been if I never had a podcast. It was the same thing with, like, I'm not an early adapter or adopter. I never know if it's adapter or adopter. I'm neither.
Yeah, you got to stop and think about that.
Yeah.
Adapter.
I think it's adapter. Yeah,
Right,
either way.
somewhere
That's
in
good.
between.
Adapter. That's the way they say it in Canada now. Of like, say, Twitter. When a lot of people got on Twitter right away, and I didn't really understand it at first. I was like, it just seems like I have Facebook, and that you can just put status updates on Facebook. So if Twitter's just Facebook, but without all of Facebook, except for, it seems weird. But then all of a sudden, everybody was in, and like, yep, I guess everybody who's in comedy now needs, quote unquote, needs a Twitter. And so I got one, and it's fun. I mean, it's only because people have agreed to it that, like, if everybody was all of a sudden like, hey, we're just going to go back to Facebook, forget about Twitter, then, like, Twitter is not, like, inherently better, I think.
Yeah, who leads?
The early adopters.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's the same
Yeah,
thing.
I'm like you.
Yeah.
I'm not either, and it took me a long time to get on Facebook, and then a longer time to get on Twitter.
But, I mean, eventually, like, it's just
I
another
need to
way.
know
Yeah.
that it's going to work first.
I agree. I like that too. Like, I mean, maybe LinkedIn will be the next thing. Like, I'm there, but I rarely. Every once in a while, I get a thing. Somebody's like, "Hey, somebody wants to connect with you on LinkedIn," and I'm always like, "Why?" And then I get updates once in a while. They're like, "Somebody switched jobs. Hey, have you seen? I just got fired. Can you help me get a job?" I'm like, I'm not even. I just accept everybody. Which is,
I'm not on that one yet.
well, I'll send you a request.
No, I've gotten requests.
Okay.
I just delete them.
But yeah, a podcast. I mean, what I like about doing the podcast is that what I like about doing anyone's podcast. Like that was the thing that really inspired me beyond my producer Dave emailing me and being like, "Hey, do you want to do a podcast? I'll do all the work." Absolutely. Which still took me a while to be like, I don't know. All the work, how
All the
much?
work?
I don't
Yeah.
have to do anything. Okay, well, I guess that's reasonable. But it's just that whenever I went on a podcast, like I could be in a bad mood and then go on a friend's podcast and be like, oh, this was really fun, just hanging out with this person. And I was like, that's the fun part about the podcast to me, is just to hang out with friends. And because in the middle, as a comedian, sometimes your days can be solitary. Like, certainly if you're on the road and you don't know anybody in the town that you're in. But yeah, like I came to Vancouver, and in advance, Graham Clark had emailed me and said, "Hey, we do a podcast here. Do you want to come over while you're in town?" I'm like, "Yes, I like to. I want to get out of my hotel room, and also I've heard of the Maximum Fun Podcast Network, and I hear great things, and I'm excited to do it." So, but I mean, it was just fun to go and hang out with those guys. They're fun guys, Graham and Dave.
I'm sitting right here.
And also, Guy, you are a fun guy to hang out with, and
I'm not part of any network, one of your fancy networks, though.
you could just call yourself a network. That's the thing. That's what my producer did.
Yeah, and this is the flagship program.
Exactly. And then eventually, I think once you say you're a network, people will be like, "Wow, how do I get to be a part of your network?" And
Because I'm not doing any of the work, though.
No, that's great.
We're the network where you have to do it all.
You want to join my network? Let me know what you're going to bring to the table.
Yeah. So the format of yours, you sit there and talk, and why 2 guests?
My initial thought was, I actually don't know why. I think I started asking people if they could do it, and then a few people were like, "Yeah, I could do it at this time. I could do it at that." I think the reason, just the first day I was recording podcasts, is I had 2 guests who had time constraints, and I was like, "Well, I guess both of you come at once, and you're friends, and we're friends." And then I organized a couple others like that, and so my initial idea was that I would have like a rotating bunch of co-hosts, like some friends that would be on regularly, like so it would be always me and a co-host and then somebody else, but the co-host would be different. So I think I always conceived of it as approximately 3 people, but then
So like Myq Douglas.
Exactly. I would get Myq and Douglas, and then myself and another Myq, or I could get a third person if I was the Myq and Myq Douglas. But Myq Douglas is different than Michael Douglas. Is that correct?
Correct. That is correct.
Michael Douglas, son of Kirk Douglas, the movie actor.
You're correct.
That's all I like. That's all I need is to be right about things.
You're too young to remember Myq Douglas, the talk show host.
I've heard of him.
He had a guest host.
Rotating
weekly guest host.
Well, then I guess exactly like that.
There you go.
But yeah, so I just enjoyed, once I started, I did a couple with a couple guests each, and it was great. It was like, obviously this is wonderful. One-on-one, you can really get in depth in things. No third people to distract us, to get in our way. But having 2 people, especially 2 people who either know each other, if we're all comfortable with each other, or all open to getting to know each other, it's real fun. There's never, not to say that a lull would be a problem, or a thoughtful pause.
It can be edited out.
It can, absolutely. You can just
will.
Yeah. Let me think about that. And the next thing, you could take out that whom entirely. Let me think about that. The next thing is how it'll be in the future. But it's really fun because you have 2 people will get into a thing, and then a third person will be like, "Oh, now I like it." I think if there's less pressure on any one person to I don't feel pressure. But if a guest comes in, and if it was one guest, and they'd be like, "Oh, how do I want to make sure that this podcast is good. It's all on me." And I'm like, well, part of it's on me, but also now we have the third person. So if you want to just take some time, think, relax, we'll have this conversation over here. You jump in, and it also helps the time. It helps the time pass by. Like I do it for about 45 minutes is what I aim for the episode to be. And then usually by the time we get to the end, I'll be like, wow, it flew by, because with 3 people, it's, the conversation just keeps going. And I feel like that way I can always have guests back on in different combinations as well. Be like, oh, that was a great guest. Now let's see what new things come up when I mix them with this other guest.
Exactly. And there will be new things, because if it's one-on-one, you're really talking about, well, I guess you could talk about issues of the day, but a lot of it would be about them. Now, early on, I used to have the 2 guest system. And it's just a different thing. They're both great.
Yeah.
I don't know why I stopped, actually. Maybe it was the opposite, that one week I could only book 1 guest.
Yeah,
that was it.
Logistically, it's certain. I mean,
Yeah.
It does cause a little, not anxiety, but always I have to have 2 people. If 2 people are like, I'm going to show up, they have to both show up. Or if I'm now going with this format, where I'm like, every time I have 2 guests,
You got to be loose, though.
I can. I am. And here's my thinking of, if ever somebody was like, I can't make it, then right, and the other person is there. The other person's like, I'm here, let's do the podcast. Then I would just have my producer, Dave, who is there in the room recording it. I'd have him go on mic for a little bit. So I'd at least maintain the illusion of of the three-person system.
He's just waiting for that moment.
It'll happen one of these days. Or, you know what, I might save that for if there is a guest that I want to do one-on-one with, but I still want to maintain the structure and be like, Dave, you're the guest. Shh, like just Dave's here in the studio. He doesn't have a lot to say. Now,
and just keep calling him different names every time.
Absolutely.
You know what would be good?
Tell me.
Just grabbing someone off the street, say, hey, you want to be on a podcast?
Very, very well could do that. I mean, there was one time where I had two people coming and one did call in sick like a few hours in advance. So I had a few hours to play with. And I sent out a couple emails and texts and found a friend who like lived nearby who was on the way, who was like at home at the time and was happy to come in. And it was great. And we had a wonderful conversation.
But usually comics are your guests?
I have comics mainly, I would say. I've had several writers, AJ Jacobs, and then people who are also comedians and writers I've interviewed or had on, conversed with Laurie Kilmartin, who has a new book out, and Baratunde Thurston is a friend of mine who has another book.
Baratunde Thurston?
Baratunde Thurston. And both of them, I think, had books. All three of my authored guests have had their books on the bestsellers list. So
Laurie Kilmartin?
Laurie Kilmartin's.
What's her book?
It's called Shitty Mom.
Oh, okay, yes.
And it came out, I think, recently. And she was just in New York. She was on the Today Show, on the Today Show and my podcast, and among other things.
And how did they say the book title on the Today Show?
That's a great question. She came to my podcast the day before, so I'm not positive. I'm sure they would, they could use the asterisks, like the comic book swear
that's visual
type. So yeah, I think they would say something like, well, she has a new book whose name we cannot say. Like the same way, like with shit my dad says, or like whenever there's like a mainstream thing that breaks through.
She was on your season of Last Comic Standing, wasn't she?
She absolutely was.
I remember.
She and I had her in with Rachel Feinstein was the other guest, and who was also in that season. And
that's right.
It actually didn't come up at all. We realized afterwards as we were walking out, hey, we didn't talk about Last Comic Standing. Oh, well. But we had a real fun time.
You know where I first heard of you?
Please tell me.
No, what do you think?
Is it pre Last Comic Standing?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, because I know
it was for sure.
I definitely got some Google alerts with during Last Comic Standing that I think you were blogging about it.
That's correct.
I definitely recall that. So, but I do not. So before that,
what did I say? Jeez, I don't even remember.
I think it was mostly positive stuff.
Good.
I think there was one.
I like to be snarky when it's on TV show. I like to be.
Oh yeah, no, I think there was one joke that I told that I also told the other night that you reviewed the show very positively. That I think there was like some wording that you took issue with, and I think I might have sent you an email to be like, hey, I think the wording makes sense, and it was just about the statistics of being vegetarian and vegan and how much that can extend your life versus it actually. I think the way I had put it that you picked up on. Anyway, this is very good podcasting.
I'm fascinated because I don't remember you sending me an email, but I'm gonna check.
It's possible. I don't think I ever got a response, so maybe it didn't get to you. Because I don't even know if you had a contact on your. I just tried.
There is, but
okay. Well,
yeah.
My recollection is I told a joke about how
it was right here when the power mysteriously went out on my recorder, but we found a new outlet and continued the conversation. Yeah, very suspicious. Just as you start to call me on my on my blogging, that the power goes out. But here we are. So tell me what we were talking about. My email? Or?
Yeah, my first connection to you that I remember is that you were blogging about Last Comic Standing, and I think it was mostly positive. I think. You seemed to enjoy what I was doing, and I was happy about that. There was one week when I actually just located the blog.
Oh, no.
Where he said, then he did a chunk on vegan douchebags, of which he is one. That is a joke that I told. He tells us vegetarians live statistically 7 years longer than non-vegetarians and vegans up to 15 years longer. Well, he lost me right there because I immediately had to Google it, not being either. The first thing I found was a German study that said vegetarians may have a significant lower risk of mortality than people who eat lots of meat. Read down 4 paragraphs, though, and they say, however, entirely abstaining from meat consumption does not appear to be the healthiest nutritional lifestyle. Comparison of the 3 categories suggests that those who occasionally consume meat have an even lower risk of mortality than the other groups. and then another link. Anyway, and then you go on to say, I know, it has nothing to do with the joke, which was decent. So you like the joke. And I'm sure there are studies out there that say any number of things, but I'm a bit of a stickler for misinformation or false premises. If something makes me stop and think because it's wrong or seems wrong, the comedian has lost me. And I don't like the response, lighten up, they're just jokes. So
That was me saying that.
that was all you. And so the premise of this joke I was in an actual vegan restaurant that had a card on the table that had like vegan facts, and it said like, here's a statistic that vegetarians live this much longer, vegans live this much longer. And it's interesting because I mean the stuff that you looked up probably is true. You can certainly be healthy and not be a vegetarian or a vegan, but in the actual real world, people who are vegans are likelier to be healthy than people who are not, because people who are not are they're not idealizing, they're not like optimizing their meat and dairy and vegetable, and they're not doing the food pyramid. Not everybody's doing it correct. So there's a lot of people out there unhealthy, 50-60% of America is obese, and most of them I would say are meat eaters. So the fact is that most vegetarians will live longer, not because vegetarianism is innately healthier than omnivores, being an omnivore, omnivorism, omnivorosity, omnivoraciousness. But
going.
Yeah, just practically speaking, or impractically speaking, most people are impractical about the way that they eat. And so I think that most people who are vegetarian, or at least are more likely to be thoughtful about what is going in their bodies. So I think I wrote to you something like that. I mean, like, hey, no, it's actually, something along those lines, as eloquently as possible. And I don't remember. I mean, I don't actually. It's possible I didn't do it. Maybe I just wrote it in a letter and then threw it out. But
it's vaguely ringing a bell now that you mention it. It's funny. Graham Clark has a line because he's a vegetarian.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a bit of a punch on him.
He does,
and he says he draws attention to that on stage and says people come up to him and are like, I think you're doing it wrong.
I've known the first two vegans I knew were actually pretty overweight, but that is less common, I think.
Sure. If you're just eating candy all day.
Yeah, candy, pasta, potatoes.
Yeah. Anyway, I love that I wrote all that in a comedy blog. No wonder nobody reads it.
I loved just reading about myself, so yeah, I was happy to see it, and you predicted that that was the round of 10 people, and there were 3 people that were going to be eliminated, and you didn't think that I would be one, and you were right. So
there you go.
You weren't right about everybody, but
no, and I was certainly wrong about the winner.
A Freudian slip, but no, everybody has different tastes, and that is totally fine.
That is what you got to remember, I guess, as an artist and getting reviews. But what do you think about? I mean, that's a big pet peeve of mine, and I know some comics will just say, "Hey, they're jokes." But what I was trying to say in that post was, anytime I'm sitting there,
you're brought out of the moment.
I'm brought out of the moment, and I immediately go, "Wait, that's not right," and then I may miss the whole thread.
I feel that way as well. I mean, like, I'll usually adjust. Like, if I'm watching somebody like, say, a Nick DiPaolo, who I think is a very proficient, funny comedian, like, with whom I disagree about many things.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the times, like, it might not even be his premise, but his overall point might be something that I'm like, I don't think that this is correct. I don't think this is, I think it's maybe like there are generalizations about, but sometimes some of it is really well, I mean, a lot of it's really well thought out, and like, it's good to get different perspectives, I think. Even like Patrice O'Neill, another guy who I would watch and be like, oh, wow, I think like this is an amazing insight into your experience. Like, say, the gender issues that you're bringing up that I don't think are, universal in a way, but he's presenting them as such. But it's really interesting. And I don't it helps me crystallize my views sort of in opposition to some of his as well. So I think it's always, unless you're a kid and this is all that you're learning about women, listening to his comedy, which I think would be probably some poor parenting going on there. Yeah, just watch this Patrice O'Neill stuff and you'll be all set to treat a woman nicely. But I definitely feel the same. Like, yeah, if a premise is like illogical or like, it's fun. I have 2 friends who do comedy. I have more than that, but these 2 specific friends, they both have these like sort of fantastic premises, like, but that are based in real things that have happened. Like, a friend of mine saw like a car driving it was like some sort of aquatic car. And like, I still don't even know exactly what and he was like, the joke goes on from there, but I'm always like, what? Like, he never explained it to my satisfaction to be like, what did you see? What was that car? I don't even, I believe
It's
you.
not something that
Yeah.
everyone's talking about.
Yeah, you're my friend. But then like another friend of mine I'll leave out the name of the friend who I'm like, what are you talking about? But my friend Ken Reed, who's a hilarious comedian in Boston, like he's had so many ridiculous things happen, but but they all like, really, that like your sister got cancer and then survived it, but got to do Make-A-Wish before that happened, and she requested that Boy George go shopping with her, and they bought ferrets together. Like, and he's telling it in this engagement that happened. That's a real thing.
Story.
He was like on a game show in England. He's found multiple dead bodies. He's broken a drug dealer's hand when later that drug dealer was trying to sell drugs to his sister. Like, just all these like, I'm like, so many. I'm like, are these things happening to everybody, or like, what is happening in your life?
No, I would put him as a suspect in those murders. He's finding all those dead bodies. One or two, you might go, okay.
I think it only is one or two dead bodies.
Still, that's.
And when he was a kid, and it was like an old person at the Thanksgiving time, they're like, hey, we haven't seen this old man. But I feel the same way. I'm sorry that you were taken out of that joke, and I will do my best. I think actually I did. I altered the wording slightly, like based on that thing, like to be like, because I did say
that's all it takes sometimes, just altering a little bit.
I mean, and that's what I feel about like when people make generalizations about, say, like men and women being different. Like I always felt like Mike Birbiglia like did a great job. Like when he would talk about like his ex-girlfriends or like he would talk about women in general, but he would always talk about his specific experience. Like, this woman was crazy in this way, or this dating. And so anybody could universalize his personal, but he wasn't saying like all women are like this. Like, but just he's connecting with more people by being more specific.
That's another pet peeve of mine. Yeah. Don't all you ladies, you do this or like. Because if at any time
you do it,
you know somebody who doesn't, you're going, well, no, his premise is completely wrong. But yes, it will make it more universal if he makes it personal, and then you can go, oh, either, well, that's funny that he's like this, or his girlfriend is like this, or his wife is like this. Mine isn't, but I guess that's a thing because everyone's laughing.
Yeah, and if you're not like accusing people of like being a certain way, then maybe they'll even if they are that way, like if you're just like the women, I met a woman who was like this, and people like, well, that's I wonder, is my woman like, am I that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, certainly. I'm a fan of certain kinds of comedy. It's required that you be honest. Like, if you're on, say, like talking about like The Daily Show, like they couldn't give you a premise that was false. Because then what are they? They're a fake news show, but it's about real news.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so I feel like there's a sense of that. Oh yeah, so we're just joking, which is Jon Stewart does sometimes.
He does that, and I don't like when he says that. But
I think it's important. I don't think he ever says we're just joking, but he does say I am just a comedian, which I think is a distinction that makes sense because he is not a trained journalist. He did not go to school for it. He is not obligated to follow the rules and but they do. I mean, they do, get multiple sources for stories. They do, investigative research. I think they behave very with a lot of journalistic integrity, even though they're not journalists, because they're sort of in spirit journalists. They are providing people with news in a way. But then I think it makes sense when he's a media critic, when he criticizes people. And if he had a news show, if he was on a news channel, then people would be justified in saying like, well, what are you doing? And well, he's like, well, I am on a comedy channel making a comedy show, and I'm just a person who is saying the things that I think. And I think that if he were to come out and say like, yeah, I'm doing an important thing here, I am doing more than just comedy, like other people can say that.
Yes.
I think I am happy to say that. That is true.
I agree, yeah.
But when you yourself say that, it just has a completely different tenor to it. You come up, if you're like, I'm doing an important thing, like then you're sort of a jerk. You can own that. Like that's what Daniel Tosh does. He's like, I'm this guy. Like I'll say these things and you might not like it, but I'll keep saying more to, justify the things I'm saying, or what have you. But I think humility goes sometimes, certainly a long way, sometimes farther than the opposite of it. And I think that part of the way, I think it's like a very Zen-like thing that Stewart, by not owning that, the weight of what he's doing, he is able to do more. He's able to do more good by claiming that he is merely, a clown.
This is the intelligence I was talking about.
I appreciate it.
I read that you don't like to be known as a intelligent comic. Did you take any offense to when I said it was sort of silly intelligence?
No, I like the word silly a lot.
Yeah.
I think I'm happy. I mean, also, I don't want people to not know that I mean, like, I don't want to seem like I'm lording over people, because I legitimately think, number one, intelligence isn't the most important thing. It's out of it's out of our control a lot. Like, I mean, everybody has the capacity, based on if you grow up and learn how to read, then we all have access to the same information as, adults with the internet, per se, like, depending what country you're in. I mean, there's so many factors,
Right.
but say, in America or Canada, where there's hopefully, free range of information out there, you can, you don't have to get all your news from just a newspaper like it used to be. You can get sources from, so many direct sources, and there's so many, under the radar, like, the People's History of the United States kind of newspaper type things. Like, oh, it's not just what they taught us in history class. And again, everybody can be as informed as they want to, and I think it's sort of important to, if you can be, to be informed,
And not just informed of the news,
right?
right? But I mean, your interests. You got grammar, you got math, you got philosophy, you got, I guess, linguistics would fall under grammar.
Yeah, those are language related topics. I mean,
Yeah.
but then also, like, movies, comic books. It's like I have my interests
Mhm.
that don't have to be shared by everybody. Like, there's some jokes that I tell about certain, like, fictional characters or TV shows or books or, comics or whatever, and I'll usually, obviously, in front of certain crowds, if it's like I've opened for Patton Oswalt, and like the comic book jokes don't have to be explained. But my
Right.
my goal is to, have as broad a reach as possible to, if I'm like, you don't watch the Vampire Diaries, well, let me explain to you what you will need to know for this. It's a show about vampires. Then that should cover it. So I don't think that, I think that it's important for everybody to figure out what they love, what they like doing, what they like knowing, and do that thing. Like, there are people out there who, and I'm happy to sort of take a survey, of, like, I'm not an expert in everything, but I like reading stuff by people who are experts in those things. Like, some people, like, just spend years and years on one topic, then they can put out an article or a book and be like, oh, well, now I know the basics of what this person knows. And that's the thing. I do want to reach everybody. Because, again, it's not important to be, like, to have a specific IQ. I think it's most important to be kind, to
In life.
yeah, exactly.
In life, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think in comedy, like, I think as opposed to, like, being kind in comedy doesn't, not that that doesn't make sense, but, like, again, you've got your Brian Regans who, he's his own, like, punching bag the most, I would say.
Mhm.
But when you enter a comedy club, or, when you're in the realm of speech, like, I think as long as we're not actually hurting each other physically, like, then, everyone has leeway to, anybody can say whatever they want. If you don't want to hear it, you can leave the club, you can change the channel, you can, make your own, you can start your own comedy club, you can make your own art in opposition. But I think most of the, the founding fathers, and most of the best comedians today would be on the side of, like, more speech is better speech, like the same reason that the ACLU fights for the right of the KKK to have their, their events, their marches, like, because why, if anybody starts deciding that somebody else can't say something, like, I have a problem. I don't know if you guys, I think there's hate speech rules up here that
There are, yeah.
I've read that I think are more harsh than the ones in my country. Because I remember a comedian, like, getting in trouble for, I think, making, like, homophobic references to some lesbians.
That was right here in Vancouver.
Wow, I'm right on the money. And I don't remember, I think he got, I don't know if it's in whatever state of appeals that it's in now, if it's all settled, but I think it was definitely not going his way for a while. Like, he was going to have to pay some thousands of dollars, I think.
Yeah, but it's not, I don't know how binding it is because it wasn't a court of law. It was a human rights tribunal.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I don't even know what does that mean then? What does the Human Rights Tribunal do?
I don't know.
Wow. But yeah, I mean, I think,
He hasn't paid it as far as I know. And
well,
I don't know that he will. But
I mean, hate speech in general is such an interesting concept. I was reading something recently about how, obviously, we in America have hate speech laws, which I think is kind of hypocritical because, like, you should be able. You can think whatever you want, and in most circumstances, you should be able to say whatever you want. And as long as it's not accompanied, as it's not accompanied with violence or inciting violence, like if you want to say that you hate black people, like I think it's better to know who hates black people, so you can be like, oh, well, let me avoid where that guy is, rather than be like, you can't say it. So now we're like, well, who hates black people? Where do I go? Nobody's saying it because nobody's allowed to. Like, and the issue of that movie, the anti-Islamic movie that people have associated with like the riots over in the Middle East, and there's like Middle Eastern countries and Islamic communities that are like, why is that not hate speech? Why is that allowed? The American government, it must be supporting it because they're not forbidding it like they do some other hate speech. Like the hate actions the action is the problem to me.
The action, that's right. Well, there used to be a thing when I was a kid, sticks and stones can break my bones, and that seems to be gone now. And bringing back to Daniel Tosh, he made a comment about rape on stage, and he was a pariah for 3 days on Twitter.
Sure.
And they talked about it on the Daily Show with Louis C.K.
I loved that.
Yes,
discussion.
that was yeah, that was great. So maybe there aren't the laws, but there are the ramifications.
Oh, certainly. I mean, yeah, it's
and it being misconstrued too.
Yes, I mean, and especially because there's so much technology, and the speed of the internet these days makes it so like it used 50 years ago, even 20 years ago, 10 years ago, you could say something in a club, and then maybe the people who were there would be mad, and then they would tell their friends, and then that would be it. You'd go to the next town.
They'd write a letter.
Yeah, and who cared about letters? But now you tweet it or you tumble it, and then it can go viral, and people talk about censorship, which this isn't, because this is still free speech. Like you're dealing with ramifications of your free speech from somebody else's free speech. Like somebody like Doug Stanhope, says things that are worse than what Tosh said in his act every day on Twitter all the time, and like. He's not getting into trouble because, well, I guess number one, he doesn't have a Comedy Central show. Maybe if he did, people would be writing to his bosses. But
he contextualizes everything, though.
He does, and I would say that Tosh did in this case as well. I mean, that's my take on it. But it just got blown out of proportion.
It was isolated, yeah.
But Stanhope, I mean, he books his own shows. He finds his own audiences, and then. The people who come to see him generally know who he is and what to expect. So he's already, before he even says anything, the context is established. Whereas, like, I think that in the Daniel Tosh situation, like, I think that the woman, if she didn't like Tosh, she either could have just left, could have complained, got her money back, could have written a letter, could have done anything. Like, I mean, yelling out is not only, she becomes rude also. Like, even if he's completely wrong to say the thing, even if, which I don't think he was inciting violence. I think he was acting within the confines of the comedic world that, of his character, of the structure of the joke that he had already established. Like, just by saying rape is funny, rape is always funny, I think was the context, which most sane people, most rational people would be like, he couldn't possibly think that. So
let's hear his explanation.
Yeah, as a comedian, let's listen to what he's saying. But then she, argued with that, and so then instead of backing down, he escalated. And my friend Erin Judge, another funny comedian, and she wrote a thing that I think part of it when it was in a New York Times piece about it, but there's an email to me, or I don't know if I think she published it maybe on Salon or somewhere. But like just the idea of the two taboos of like feminism and comedy that I think Louis covered on the Daily Show also, the idea that these, the rape taboo and just the fact of like that the heckling tab, like heckling is like a huge deal to comedians, and obviously rape is worse than heckling.
Let's just say that right off.
Number one, rape is worse than heckling, but talking about rape is not necessarily worse than heckling to a comedian, certainly. Like to this woman, talking about rape was worse than heckling, but to the comedian, heckling was worse than talking about rape.
And but about it's worse than talking about rape.
Sure.
I think the people who who are against talking about rape worry about what you say is that it's inciting others who listen, who may not be as strong-willed as us, to go out and think, well, this is just something that we can all laugh about later.
I did read a particularly thought-provoking. There was some statistics cited that college age men in America, I think, 1 out of 20 has admitted to raping. Not be like, do you rape? Yes, but like being presented with scenarios where like, have you ever had sex with a girl who was like too drunk to she was saying no initially, like that sort of thing, and like 1 out of 20 men of college age said that yes, that I've done that, which is technically rape according to the law. And if there's 1 in 20 saying that, then there's who knows however many more like recognize that as the question and we'll be like, well, I'm not gonna admit to rape. So like, but it's at least 1 in 20 who've admitted it. And this woman, I think, who had written this article was saying like, obviously reasonable people, non-rapists know like or can listen to that joke and then not go out and rape people. But for the 1 in 20 that are like, oh yeah, like those people will think. I forget what the line was. It was something like, feminists don't think that all men are rapists, but rapists do. Like that rapists assume that everyone else is doing there's like, oh yeah, we have to pretend that we don't do this. But yeah, you push a girl until she says until you can, because you do whatever you can get away with. And that if there are people that think that, they obviously like being told by other men, oh, we don't actually do that. We're like, wink, I gotcha, of course. So that those are the people that I actually considered. I was like, huh, I wonder how that person does react to like that person's like, oh, that maybe does justify my worldview. So
they're high-fiving their buddies.
Yeah, so not wanting, certainly I think it's important as a comedian to think everybody has a responsibility when you're saying things in public. Like you're like, I mean, the same way that Jesus did too. Like people take Jesus' words today and like go and bomb an abortion clinic and be like, well, that's because if you trace it back, then it's a thing that Jesus said. And like, I think that in a similar way, Tosh is like Jesus in that he wasn't, he's not intending any ill will. He's saying a thing in a certain context, of thing that very different to what Jesus was saying. I think Jesus might have gotten a little more twisted, but the fact is that you're not always once you put it out there. I think all you can do is be yourself and present your art, your words in as much as the way that you want to, as much as possible. And if people misconstrue it and take it from there, like there's a certain point beyond which it's not your fault. I'm glad. I don't think that anybody did, certainly rape that woman. Like when he was like, wouldn't it be funny if that woman was raped? Everybody there understood it actually wouldn't be funny to rape that woman. It's funny that you're saying, if they thought it was funny that he was saying it, it's the talking that's the funny thing. Like the action would be the bad thing.
Would be horrific. And yes, and if he replaced the word funny with weird or coincidental, that we were just talking about this, and then look.
Oh, yeah.
That's how I interpreted it.
Oh,
Not
yeah.
like, sick 'em, boys.
Yeah, of course. And then, did you read the Onion article that came out, I think, like the next day or two, which was, I think, really amazing about, the headline was something like, Daniel Tosh laughs through his own horrific rape. And it's just the article was like just very brutal, or like very like blunt language. Like he's like being smashed against a wall and his teeth are getting punched and he's being sodomized and he's just like, you have to admit, this is pretty funny. And like, it was there. And to me, there's no way like that anybody could misconstrue the humor there. Like they were tapping into, in fact, the exact thing that Tosh was himself alluding to, that which I think when he was either pressed about it or like when he was clarifying, he's obviously saying like, there's nothing that you can't joke about. Like that there's things that if people are like, you can't make that thing funny, like, yes, this thing can be fun. Like,
and it's a challenge.
Yeah. And the Onion did it beautifully in a way that I think anybody who was mad at Daniel Tosh, any feminist, any woman, any man who was on the side, like opposed, being like, hey, I don't think you should be joking about rape because whatever. If they read that Onion article, I can't imagine that they would not find it funny and appropriate.
Well, one of the articles, I think maybe Salon, the one you were talking about,
Could be.
where they said, no, like Louis C.K.'s joked about rape, George Carlin has joked about rape, and those are good because we can see the irony or whatever it was, but you can't really, because as we said earlier, comedy is so subjective.
Yes.
Now, you can't be the arbiter and say, see, no, that one is okay, this one isn't.
Yes. I mean, I think you can make that decision for
For
yourself.
yourself,
Yeah,
yes.
you can be like, you can say like, I don't like Daniel Tosh.
Yeah.
You could certainly say that, and you can never give him money. You can campaign, like that is America. You can be like, hey everyone, let's not do it. But there's another guy. Oh, actually, there's a comedian named Colin Kane who has had like similar, like but much smaller scale.
The muscle guy?
Yeah, the muscle guy. Has he been here?
No.
He had there was some video he put out that was, I think, there were some negative comments about it being misogynistic. And he is, I believe, let's say in real life, I mean, I don't know him very well in real life,
But you know him a bit?
I know him a bit.
Okay.
And so his act is like sort of a, has some shock misdirections of like that, sort of an equal opportunity offender, I would say. The kind of like a Lisa Lampanelli sort of style of like just quick insult jokes to different, to all races, sexualities, that sort of thing. Maybe not himself as much, not the straight white man, but and so people would take issue, and then of the people that there were a lot of people came to his defense, and half of the people that would come to his defense were like, it's just jokes, lighten up, it's comedy, he's not hurting anybody. And then another half, maybe not exactly half, but another contingent of people were like, he is saying the things we all think.
Yeah, that's the
racial
problem.
racial stereotypes, sexual stereotypes. And that's the thing that Chappelle faced, I feel. Like what my interpretation of why he left was like, he was doing the same thing. He was putting out into the world exactly the vision that he had for his comedy, his art. And then there's a contingent of people who are like, this is great. This is hilarious. We understand exactly what you're doing. And there are other people that could be like, I am a racist, and this feeds into exactly what I believe.
So what do? You can't know who is going to be your fan, but you have control over your material.
Yes.
And I know at Lisa Lampanelli show I went to once, she started in on gays, and this older guy in the crowd shouted out his support of what her character was saying. And she immediately put that guy in his place, sort of broke character, came out and said, no.
You do not understand.
Yeah. And then she went back to it.
That's really funny. And that's great. I mean, when she was on Mark Maron's podcast, did you listen to that?
Yes.
I believe there was a part where she said, like, she's like, I'll make fun of anyone that I make fun of, like, I love. Like, I'm happy. Like, she's obviously, she's dated many a black person and will make fun of black people. She has a huge gay fan base. She obviously cares about gay people. And she's that thing where
donates money to them. Yeah.
Tons, yeah. And but then I think he was asking her, she said, like, I don't ever joke about, like, the French or, like, Europeans because I legitimately don't like them. And I was like,
didn't help her cause.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
What a thing to say. But yeah, I think that's the thing to do. What else can she do? Because most people understand, but you'll always run the risk. Like, I think I saw Sarah Silverman. She obviously, I think, has built an amazing character and body of work to the point where most people, if you know who she is, like, you know who she is and you know what she stands for. And I think she is brilliant and like on point, and her heart is in the right place, like across the board.
I agree too, but you never know that somebody might be there going, yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And I think that's the price of free speech. That is, it is worth it. I think so you can choose what you want to say or what you don't want to say. But I think that also that person is going to think what they think, regardless of whether you say like. I don't think that Sarah Silverman's jokes will like embolden a racist to the point of violence. Like, maybe I'm wrong.
I love these topics, but I also wanted to say, you mentioned Mark Maron.
I did.
And I listened to your episode. That was in the first 100, wasn't it?
Yeah, I believe it was number 63-ish.
63-ish. I do remember having thoughts about it as I was listening. And I was wondering about your experience on there.
Number one, a lot of people have enjoyed it. A lot of people have come out to me and be like, I really, like, that was cool. Number one, I was thrilled to get to be on it, number one, because he is, one of the most, I think, important comedians of our time. And so just to know him is an honor, and to get to see him work and be a part of this obviously massive thing that he's created was an honor. I think that at the time, I mean, he and I have had, I think I would say we are friendly. But at the time we were friendly. I went over to his house, and we, chatted a bit. Maybe to have he offered me some food. Maybe I forget. And he was like, "Well, let's go to the garage." And then it became, he took this sort of adversarial role to my being, my like I think
to your essence. Yeah.
I think he started by saying like, "I don't know if I like you're a little too together for me," that kind of. And I think towards the end, he's like, I really, he's like, I think you should, he's like, I want to see you like just, like lose control. Is like, I think that was the main issue, is that I like, he would ask me a question about this guy that I'd worked with, and I gave a measured answer, and he's like, diplomatic, he wanted more of, I don't know, an outburst or a show of emotion, or because I think that's who he is. And it would have been like, a way of, I think he thinks that at the time, I think he thought that I, was, I don't know, pent up, full of aggression, rage.
Thought you were.
Potentially. I think, we see what we want to see. I don't know if he was, I think he was just trying to like connect in a way that, it's interesting because I think one of the parts that, I was just saying this earlier, somebody else, that I think there's a part that was edited out where I feel like we connected the most on, like, we were both divorced. We both talked about our relationship experience. And it was like one of the more sort of, quote unquote real topics that we covered, as opposed to like in the beginning is like, you tell jokes about words. How's that? Like in a way that I think a lot of other people were like, seems like he was kind of mean to you, a little condescending. And I'm like, well,
that's what I thought. I thought maybe he's having a bad day. But it was some of that patented Marin condescension.
Which, I mean, I think...
And it seemed like it just floated right over your head, or, I mean, in a good way, or you weren't even going to go there with him.
It was more, I mean, I certainly...
As you say, measured.
Yes. I understood where he was coming from. And I was, the way that I handled it was to just be positive, because, I mean, I legitimately was happy to be there, and I was like, a very sort of like yes and, a very improv minded kind of like, oh yes, I understand what you're saying, and here's my take on that. And because I am, I think, a positive person for the most part. Not that I don't have, anxieties, regrets, flaws, like things within me. One regret that I have, like I've thought about it for a while, it sort of weighed on me that like, oh wow, I like that. Not that it got derailed, but I'm like, oh, if I could have handled things a different way, maybe, like, hindsight being obviously 2020 more than my actual eyesight. I was like, oh man, I could have said this, or I could have asked him about it. Like one thing that was sort of maybe petty, but when he was like, jokes about words, huh? That's what you do. Like, I think after that, like, I listened back to a few of his CDs, and I, like, found, like, every instance, or, like, whenever I listen to the podcast, I'll be like, hey, you made a joke with a word there. That one there. Bipolar coaster. That's a word. That's all it is a word.
Yeah.
And obviously, he is more...
Did you email him and
I
tell him?
I didn't. But also, I think, in the past year sometime, he was interviewed, or, like, gave he had to give his, like, he's like, 5 young comics to look out for. And this year, like I was one of the people that he named.
Oh.
And it was like, it was really nice, and it was kind of like, in a way, vindicating, and in a way that I think by this point I didn't specifically need it, or feel that not that I didn't want it. I was certainly, he is like this angry comedy dad that like, I mean, I have a good relationship with my father, but I think of Mark as like the disapproving father that I never had. I'm like, I want him to like me. And one of the ways that I think that I have come to that to I think he does like me, but is because I'm not desperate for his, like, I don't care. And like, there's a while when he would occupy a bigger space. Like, I don't listen to every one of his episodes anymore, because for a while, sometimes he would get into my head, and I was like, I don't think it's healthy to listen to him all the time. Like, it's interesting, but
well, he seems to have really opened up his view of comedians and what they should and shouldn't be in the last year or so. Like now he even talks about, like silly comedy's the best sometimes, and like he loves Brian Regan. At the time, probably a large part of him still does think that the ideal comedian really opens himself up on stage, and reveals all.
And he thinks that because that's what he does.
That's what he
And
does,
he's
and
like,
so that's
I
why
am
he
the
does it.
ideal comedian.
And I've heard him say too, "Oh, it's easy. Anyone can write jokes." And I always think, really, anyone? I don't think so.
No, I mean, like, and I don't think that he would, he would not argue that Stephen Wright is not a good comedian. Like, he would not be like, Stephen, you should really be opening up more, or Emo Phillips, or Hedberg. Like these,
That's
like,
why there's always all these exceptions, all these comedy rules that the comedy nerds have. You can point to any number of exceptions.
I
Dimitri
mean,
Martin, another one.
yeah, I think, and it's funny because Dimitri's a guy who also like has done like one-man shows. I think in Edinburgh, like years ago, he's talked about where like he's like, yeah, I opened up, I've told personal stories, and he's like, but that's not what I wanted. Like, you don't have to.
Yeah.
He's like, I like writing jokes. Like, there's different kinds of people. Like, I read this book. Do you know the book Ishmael by a guy named, I think his name is Daniel Quinn, which is the same name as
The
one
host?
of the guys who's hosting for me
Yeah.
this weekend. The guy. And the book Ishmael, one of its main messages, it's a novel, but it has a lot of like sort of educational aspects to it. Like sort of like discusses like the history of religion and agriculture in our society, and talks about the way that people do live versus the way people did live and could live. And specifically, one of the main things is that like there is no one way to live. That's like the takeaway, that there used to be all these different tribes, and like each tribe would have their rules and the way their culture worked, and like sometimes they would war with each other, but our culture, like somehow once agriculture came into play, we started planting food, which meant that we had more food, which meant that we could have more people, which meant that we needed more land. We had to spread out. We had to go, sort of proselytize and either convert other people. Hey, we got to move in here. You guys have to do what we do now, or that we would conquer them and make them do it. And that's the way, the history of our culture spreading all over the world. Not just America, not just Canada, but just, sort of like the Western philosophy of like, just capitalism, say, is like wanting more. Like, and this Daniel Quinn called it like takers, that we're a society of takers compared to leavers, which would be like sort of a more of a caveman type of, like indigenous people of a jungle, who don't farm. They like, they gather things. Maybe they hunt a little bit. They live off the land. They take just, whatever is provided. They don't go out and like reach. So the idea that, I mean, no one society is right, like, I mean, we can look at, obviously, I think like things like genital mutilation, like female genital mutilation, bad, like actively causing, unnecessary harm is a thing that most people will agree, like, that's no good. But if it's stuff that doesn't hurt anybody, like, oh, they drive on the right side, we drive on the left, whatever, or the opposite, like, that doesn't matter. That's not important. There's, hey, no, the right way is the right, like, there's so many things that aren't important. And the type of comedian that you are is also one of those. Like, there's like, whether there's some people that are, you got to be political, you got to rail against the system. Like, it's much more important to, there's so many wrongs that are being done, we got to fix it. Like, but if every comedian was doing that, that might be like even less effective. It'd be like, people are just, wow, I don't even want to go see a comedian anymore.
That's right.
I want, like, some comedy is for escape, some comedy is for connecting. Like, if you love Maron's comedy because you're like, wow, I love seeing a person just bare their soul. But if you love Dimitri Martin's comedy because you're like, I like math and like these jokes are fun, like, then why not? If you like Brian Regan, it's just makes you laugh. Like, I mean, there's so many people make you laugh in so many different ways. You have to figure out your own thing. And that was the thing in this, like, this top 5 thing where Maron was like, Myq, he's like, I wasn't always on board, but he has his this anal way of constructing a thing, but he's really figured it out. He knows what he's doing.
You do a pretty good Maron.
Is that I just try to I embody the, I think there is some of him in me, like I definitely, I relate to him. I mean, I think I'm happier. I think that's my nickname, Happy Maron. Like, I mean, we come from similar cultures, like, I think Jews, etc. But
Jewish atheists.
Yeah, I mean, and comedians, like, we have so much more in common that I think that's why the differences in our styles are much more pronounced.
And talking about those comedians who get up and rail against the man or whatever, I mentioned in the review of you that you're able to get your thoughts out there, impart these little stealth jokes, and it's probably more effective because people aren't sitting there going, wait, I disagree with this. And,
I mean, it's for me, the joke is the important, like, funny is the most important thing as a comedian, I think.
But you're not going to say anything just for being funny if you don't agree with it.
No,
Or
I
you
mean,
can't make it obvious that you're not agreeing with it.
yeah, no, I mean, well, I've have some jokes that if you just looked at the words of the joke, like, like Sarah Silverman, if you just looked at the words of some of the jokes, you might be like, well, that's an awful thing to say. Why would you ever say that to a person? But, I do aim to make it clear, like, where I stand on things.
Right.
But even then, sometimes you could be as clear as possible. Be like, this is the truth about me, and here are the jokes, and here's how it works. And the same way you could watch, if you watch The Daily Show or even like The Tonight Show or Conan, any show where they give you a setup from the news and then the punchline, which could be nonsense. It could be funny. It could be real also, or it could just be a ridiculous thing. But that setup is true. That you're not like, in Libya today, this happened. You're not like, did that really happen? Like, we agree, like, that the etiquette of that show, of that joke structure is like, that did happen.
Right.
And here's where the joke comes from. Where the same way that if a comedian's like, so I'm a plumber, and the thing is that, I used to be a plumber, and then if you found out they were never a plumber, you'd feel like, why'd you lie to me? That seems like, I understand you don't have to say, it's just jokes. And
Right.
maybe if you're playing a plumber character, that's fine too.
Yeah.
But if you're just like, I'm a guy who is now a comedian that used to be a plumber, and they're like, okay, but I wasn't really a plumber. What are you doing? That's but it's still funny because I think there are people that will make things up. They'll make up past things. They'll make up girlfriends. They'll conglomerate things, like whatever the case may be. Audience members will. I used to tell a joke like this where people would come up to me after a show and they'd be like, okay, so are you really a vegan? Are you really Jewish? Are you really growing a beard? Like all things that I said I was doing or was.
Are those real glasses?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hey, wait. So that's really true? Like, you really, like, I mean, you have a girlfriend. You have you're not gay. You're really not gay. Whatever. Because people are like, I don't know what's real because it's jokes. Like, you come out and anything could be false. Like, you could just be lying to me this whole time. I'm like, well, pretty much.
I could be lying to you now, too.
I could be, but I mean, like, I'll tell people, like, the setups are true. In general, like, I think, unless it's patently obvious. Like, I used to have a joke where I would say I went to Los Angeles and I visited, there was an earthquake that destroyed everything at the Etch-a-Sketch Museum. And, like, I mean,
hey, wait a second.
Yeah, like, there's no Etch-a-Sketch Museum. Like, I mean, that's the punchline. But also, like, I think actually I've been in New York and there was an earthquake. I should use that one. Then it's totally true. Yeah. But just the idea that, for the most part, if I'm like, I'm in a relationship or I'm not in a relationship, I was married, people think of me as Jewish, I don't eat meat, whatever the facts are, like, those are the places that I'm building from. And I think if I can present to people things about topics that they might not have, be like, well, I don't agree with that. I don't like, obviously being, the words atheist and vegan, and even Jew, or like, there's all these words that are like loaded with potentially negative connotations that people have. There's baggage associated because people think vegan and they're like, oh, PETA, I hate them. They're like, because the vegans that they know are loud and obnoxious. Or the same thing with atheists. Like, there's plenty of people out there not hurting anybody, like living all kinds of lives as vegans, as atheists, as whatever they are, to the point where sometimes the being overt about it does everybody, like you said, a disservice. And so just, using a term is not as important as expressing yourself as fully and reasonably as possible. Like, I got into a conversation a month ago with a guy who worked at this club I was at in Minneapolis, and he was like, I don't think he didn't identify as a libertarian, but he was like opposed to Obamacare for like just reasons of like, he's like, if I don't think people should be forced to have insurance if they don't want it, number one. And then I'd say, well, what if the fact that people, if they don't have insurance, will go to emergency rooms and then we end up paying more for them than if they were forced to have insurance, because ultimately most people end up needing some care at some point. And he said, well, I think we're starting from the same place where like everyone should have the capacity to get, everyone should have the opportunity to be able to make money and then be able to spend that money on care or have it provided by somebody. We're just not sure the way to do it. And he's like, well, his perspective was, if you don't have insurance and you say, well, then then you shouldn't be able to go to the hospital. He's like, if you're like, I'm not going to, no, thank you, I'm not going to participate. Then he's like, then they should be like, sorry, no care for you. And he's like, if I
I
don't,
get the Hippocratic Oath.
I mean, yeah, that there's all these things, these oppositional things. And I think one thing that either I came up with or I was talking to somebody else and I was like, oh yeah, what about this? Like, obviously he's like, he's for socialized fire departments, right?
Sure.
Like, he's like, you shouldn't be able to opt out of firefighting because say your house is on fire. If you're like, well, I don't have firefighting insurance, so they're not going to come get this, then every other house in your neighborhood is threatened by fire. So we need to have a communal fire department. And so I was like, what about like something like polio or meningitis or whatever disease could that needs to be that can be vaccinated for. I think polio is a good example where if everybody wasn't vaccinated for it, if a few people opted out, then they could start giving it to more people and like it would spread like a fire. And he was like, that seems like a reasonable point that I would have to consider if I was in charge.
So you won.
Oh yeah, I think so. I think that's what's important is winning. I forget why I get into that, but just the fact that I think that it's important to be open to number one, sharing your ideas, having other oppositional ideas share with you. Obviously not while doing comedy. I will share ideas, and then if people want to share back afterwards, especially because I know some of my lifestyle, some of my views are on the surface like fringe, like on the sort of on the outskirts of the mainstream. But I think they come from a reasonable universal place where I'm like, people are like, why are you a vegan? And I'm like, well, because I'm anti unnecessary pain being caused if it can be avoided. And I think most people are like, yeah, I wouldn't just kick a cat for no reason. And that's essentially in a microcosm of the meat industry, like that people don't think about it because it's not right in front of them. But in the last few hundred years, it's been pretty brutal. So
right, but when you come out on stage, you're not saying that.
No,
right, but you are letting it known that you are a vegan. Your views are out there, right?
Yeah,
but always with a great punchline, always with a solid base, a solid foundation, and so people aren't going, that guy's just crazy.
Oh, I appreciate it. I mean, and I think part of it is understanding how I am perceived or how like whatever type of person, whatever the characteristic I'm talking about is being perceived. Like, I think when a line that you alluded to in this is I used to start introducing my vegan chunks of material by saying like, I'm a vegan. Are there any other douchebags here? And like immediately I feel like connects with people in a way like, I do think that about like this guy is less of a douchebag for calling himself a douchebag,
Yeah.
Like, I mean, sort of like the Jon Stewart trick of being like, I am but a comedian, and then able to spoon feed you the message, the news, the whatever it is. I mean, not that I think that I am necessarily changing a lot of people's, like, I don't think I'm creating a lot of vegans, but I do hope that, especially with podcasts too, where you get to be more thoughtful, where it doesn't have to be a joke a minute, where we can talk like this about, I don't even think that everybody has to be vegan. I think that it's just important to know, like, if you can get your meat from a local source, where they, that they treat the animals better than factory farms, then great. Like, I think I'm totally ethically on board there.
They treat the animals better before they slaughter them.
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
well, my problem isn't with the death; it's with the pain while alive. I mean, I would much rather, die soon than live long in constant pain.
You're a rational guy, and we got to close where I think I started pretty much early on, where I said, where I first.
Oh yeah, I do not know where you first came across me.
It was from Shecky Magazine.
Ah.
And
in the comments?
In the comments, and I would comment. And, of course, your name is very recognizable because it's Myq, pronounced Mike. At the time, I didn't know how to pronounce it.
Sure.
Like, Myq.
Oh, yeah, it's and you are not alone, and you're not unreasonable to be confused.
But, hey, it made an impression on me, right? And also what I really liked, because, comment, message boards, they can get pretty ugly.
Sure.
But you were always very rational. And you would disagree, but respectfully, and I really like that.
Oh, I always enjoyed writing on there. Like sometimes I like those. I like Brian and Tracy, and I think they're funny people and they're good comedians. And I like that I just like reading about interacting with people about comedy, reading about it, learning about it, discussing it. And there's sometimes I remember they would have. Most of the time, a lot of things that I would agree with, but then sometimes where they would go like a little overboard in one direction, and I would just be like, "Are you Are you sure?
Yeah.
Is that real? Like, one thing that I remember specifically is like they're always very concerned about the negative portrayal of the comedian in like the mainstream media. And there was like I think a political cartoon of some, I don't even know, it was a it was a cartoon from a newspaper where a comedian was on stage and there were like tomatoes splattered
I
behind him
remember this one. Yeah.
and there was a knife in the wall, and they like seriously seized on that as like a knife, like that is like, like an assault, like like it's like alluding to the idea that it could be okay to do so. And especially like if a comedian made a joke like that, and essentially that's what that is, it's a joke, it's a
It's
written
a
joke.
visual joke. Yeah.
And like, I mean, the same way that they come out in, in defense of comedians being able to say whatever they want, like this is the exact same thing, but it's just because it's about comedians, it's attacking it's the very thing that like Louis was talking about on the Daily Show with the Tosh thing, that like comedians like that, like feminists don't have a sense of humor about this thing, and they're like, hey, it's like, see, and then like, and comedians don't have a sense of humor about like about their ego or whatever it was exactly about, like, we're very serious about comedy, and they're like, hey, like that. I was just like, that is a ridiculous. Like the idea that that picture could like is ridiculous to me. That like people, that a person would see that, like the person who listens to Sarah Silverman or Dave Chappelle, and then or looks at this cartoon and is like, I do want to throw a knife at a comedian, like is preposterous.
Mhm.
And like that, I think that I was like, I can't imagine that like, what point are you trying to make by being mad at this thing?
Well, they took it as, I guess, reflective of society's views on you guys are less than human or something. I don't know.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, which I'm sort of glad that their perspective exists, but like, in a way, they sometimes like fill the role that I think PETA does, like of this. If people looked at them and be like, "This is what comedians think," like I think it's like it's the like extreme. I don't even know if it's really not libertarian, but it's like, I mean, because they are sort of libertarians, but then they're also like conscious in a piece, like not PC. They're not PC, but they're like there's a political correctness to the way that comedians should be treated in a sense. Like I don't think they would put it that way, but like they're essentially like comedians are deserving of respect, which I agree with. I mean, I think humans are
Yeah.
humans are deserving of respect, and actually, that's where one place that I disagree with them a fair amount is that I don't think we should come to the defense of every comedian under every circumstance. I mean, I think that we should be like, everybody can say what they want to say, but so can the people who are like, I don't like that. Like the people who, got mad at Tracy Morgan are like, I think that it's, people who aren't at the show. I think the farther you get removed from the situation, the less, not right you have, but the less capacity you have to respond like intelligently to the actual situation. Like you could quote a joke and miss the tone. Like you could do that to Sarah Silverman. You could do it to anybody. And so in that respect, I do think it's important. They are doing an important job of saying like, hey, a comedian can say whatever he wants. Every comedian, we should all be defending everybody. But also, I mean, I can say like, yes, I agree with you, but also like, I don't like that comedian. I don't like listening. Like,
And here's why.
yeah, and I should be able to say what I want to say with my freedom of speech.
Right. But you don't have the blog.
Yeah.
But I would see your name, and then when you went on Last Comic Standing, there's the guy, right? I made the connection.
You did. Well,
and
thank you.
and with a name which is quite common, Myq Kaplan.
Very.
Right.
It is very common.
At the time when I saw MYQ, what the hell is it?
Yeah, agreed. Many people. Why would you? Why? Yeah.
Why would you? But it works, doesn't it? Like, there's got to be a million Myq Kaplans in the world.
There was one on my block growing up. I got invited to like a birthday party to a kid I didn't know. It was supposed to be.
Did you go?
No, I was like, who's Matthew? And she's like, I don't know. That's probably not for you. And there's even in show business, like when I first started doing comedy, I tried to get a website. I was like, I should get Myq Kaplan spelled all the ways, but that one was already taken by a wildlife photographer. There's like Michael Kaplan. There was a Michael B. Kaplan who's like a costume designer. Like it's so to be in I'm in AFTRA or SAG-AFTRA now, I think, the television, actors union of some kind. And if my name was just Michael Kaplan, I think I would need to use my middle initial or make it something else. But I use MYQ and it's fine because I'm the only one there. So yeah, it's come in handy to get like the Gmail, the YouTube account, the Twitter. It's fun. The only real downside, I mean, the couple downsides is like if people when they don't know it, when people first come across it, one, don't know how to say it. If they only hear it, then they don't know how to spell it. And it can rub people the wrong way because it is sort of like it's an affectation. Like why cutesy? What are you trying to be a certain? And to be fair, when I came up with it, I was that. I was a teenager that was trying to be like weird on purpose. But then it's like since then, that was 15, 17 years ago, and I haven't been. I don't think about it every day. It's just normal. It's the status quo, and will be more of a deal to undo it at this point.
It's your brand.
It has been created for better or for worse. So now whenever anybody comes across me anew, they're like, "What? I'm supposed to now? I gotta call you this?" I'm like, well, "You don't have to do anything." I don't know why you're getting all worked up over it. It is old news.
Gotta call you this? It
Yeah.
sounds exactly the same.
Yeah, I gotta type. Oh, you can't be like. When
You know
people-
what? You gotta make it into it's an acronym. What does it stand for?
You're quick.
There you go. You already thought of that.
I had thought of that years
Yeah,
ago.
you're quick.
Or Myq, young quotient. Yep, that's the other side of that one now. Didn't work as well.
Didn't work. No.
Myq yapping quietly.
myyourquick.com. Get it?
Oh, that's probably taken. You know what? There's a Twitter that's called Miss You Quotes, and they always do hashtag MYQ. So I always if I ever
Miss you
search,
quotes.
yeah, like they're quotes
Right.
for missing you.
Oh. Hashtag MYQ. That's not right.
No, I don't like it at all.
Yeah. Well, we could change that by hashtagging Myq MYQ for you.
Yeah, I'll get in their business.
Yeah. Get up in their face. Hey, Myq. It's been well over an hour. This wouldn't be 45 minutes for your podcast.
No, yeah,
You'd have to make it a two-parter.
I would. I don't, which hasn't happened yet. So
How do you stay to 45 minutes? I can't do it. I can't stay to an hour.
Well, I mean, I schedule them back to back, so I have to stop.
Oh, okay, we got new guests coming in.
But also, I mean, I just have my producer like flash me like we're at 30, we're at 40, and whatever's going on, I just like, well, this is real interesting, but we have to go to some last thoughts. And then if there was like a lot more that wanted to be said or that seemed like we were on track to do, I'm like, well, we'll do it next time.
There you
Leave
go.
people wanting more.
That is showbiz. Well, I'm glad you came to town. I'm glad I got to meet you.
Same here.
And I'm glad we got to rehash the blog from what year was that?
2010 only.
Was that the same year as Brian and Tracy were on?
Yeah, I believe it was.
So there you go.
Yeah.
It all comes together.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Myq.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed that. My interview with Myq Kaplan, MYQ. Kaplan, he's quick. No, that would be MHQ. The show's been What's So Funny here on CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm here every Sunday night at 11 p.m., and that's where I will be. This is where I'll be next Sunday. Thanks again to Myq for talking, and if you get a chance to see him next time he's in town, you must go. Highly recommended. All right, talk to you next week.